Commerce for Trade Development, Ray Vickery. Thank you so much for talking to me, and I really appreciate your time. Now, we witnessed a big development last evening with a U.S. court blocking Donald Trump's tariffs. Secretary Vickery, from your experience in trade policy, what's your initial reaction? What are the typical legal grounds on which the courts have blocked this presidential tariff action? And in your view, what might have been the court's reasoning here?
Well, thanks very much for having me, Rena. I think that this is a landmark case, watershed. Of course, this is at the Court of International Trade, which is at the district court level. So there are going to be appeals, and it'll probably go up to the Supreme Court eventually. So this story is not over by any means. But essentially, what this federal court has decided with a three-judge panel is that President Donald Trump, and his administration have acted illegally in imposing tariffs across the board on the 10% tariff and on the additional tariffs that were imposed on Canada and Mexico. The grounds which the Trump administration had cited under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act of 1977 was that there was a persistent trade deficit which had put people out of work and transferred manufacturing overseas. And that was the basic reason for the 10% across the board. The court ruled that that is not the kind of emergency which is envisaged by the act, that there was no immediate international or national security question. Indeed, I think the court saw that the Trump administration has a misunderstanding in regard to trade deficits. Trade deficits are not necessarily something imposed just by unfair trade practices by another country, but they have to do with the United States' own saving and spending habits, the fact that the dollar is a reserve currency and allows us to spend beyond our means on foreign goods and services. So that did not stand up under that act. By the way, that act had never been cited or used by any other president since its enactment in 1977. As for the tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and indeed China, there were additional tariffs that were cited to meet a so-called national emergency in regard to fentanyl, and one in regard to immigration. What the court ruled was that these were not the sorts of emergencies which were envisaged by the act. What the International Economic Powers Act, Emergency Powers Act, envisages is an emergency necessary to protect American companies, to protect the American economy. They're not to be used, these powers are not to be used to gain leverage for other really non-trade activities, such as the illegal importation of fentanyl, or in regard to stemming immigration. There are other tools which are available. Now, the Trump administration, of course, is not going to take this lying down. They've already tried to appeal to void the temporary restraining order, which was put into effect, and doubtlessly they will appeal to the Court of Appeals, and if they lose there, up to the Supreme Court. So the story is not over, but what is certain that has happened is uncertainty. The companies, which are 5 small business companies which were plaintiffs, as well as 12 states and a nonprofit advocacy institution, the uncertainty created for business has already taken its toll on the American economy. Of course, you know that the markets have discounted some of the Trump bluster, if you will, the President Trump bluster, the negotiating tactics. There's a meme, as you probably know, going around the networks, around the internet, called TACO. TACAO, which Trump always backs down on that, or Trump always chickens out, is what it is. And indeed, there have been delays after grand pronouncements such as that on April the 2nd about reciprocal tariffs, including a 26% tariff across the board, in addition to the 10% on India itself, which really had no basis in law in order to impose it. Unfortunately, the Trump administration's actions here go right along with the president's view that somehow he's not a president constrained by the judiciary, nor even by the legislature, but that he is some sort of king or a dictator who can rule by decree. That's not the American system. It's not the constitutional system. And the Constitution of the United States is very plain that the basic power in regard to tariffs and international trade lies with the Congress. Now, there can be some delegation of that power to executive entities, and indeed there are statutes that the Trump administration may go back to now to try to find some other basis other than this International Economic Emergency Powers Act. But for the time being, it's a rebuke. It's a win for legality, if you will. It's a win for constitutionality. But it remains to be seen whether the damage created by the uncertainty, the back and forth, the up and down, indeed with the trade talks which are now going on between India and the United States, it just throws uncertainty, and it's no way to run a railroad, run tariff negotiations, much less the administration of the United States.
Right. In your words, the back and forth, up and down. Now, if you were a country like India, China, Japan, or the EU, what do you think would be your assessment of this development? You know, sitting out there and watching this play out in America, what are American trading partners thinking at this time?
Well, I think American trading partners are looking at what's happened, not only this taco business of Trump always chickening out, indeed delaying, which has happened with the April 2nd announcements, happens with Canada, Mexico, and with the EU. You know, there's this. There was a claim that he was going to put an additional 50%. What I think any trade negotiator at this point is going to say, well, listen, let's take another look here. We're not even sure, according to your own courts, what authority you have to be negotiating this. We're not going to go forward until you get your own house in order about whether or not it's going to be binding on you as well as us. And so I think that the trade negotiators for India, for Europe, for China are going to take a step back and say, look, you explain this to us now. And before there are other steps taken. One hopes that a good, mutually beneficial outcome for India and the United States might be reached. It's plain that India, at least it's plain to many observers, that India has not benefited across the board by its traditional high protective tariff approach. And indeed, members of the present government in India have indicated as much. And so it would be mutually beneficial to be able to lower tariff and non-tariff barriers. You know, in Trump 1.0, there was a negotiation which came close to getting a freer trade, not free trade, but a freer trade arrangement between the United States and India. And one hopes that that would happen. But it's not going to happen with this bullying approach, which the Trump administration has indicated, or indeed this so-called reciprocal tariff across the board, looking at trade deficits as the measure of unfairness. As I said earlier, trade deficits can be caused by a variety of economic factors, including the prosperity of the United States and the fact that we have a reserve currency. So I think that the negotiations are going to be slowed down. And I think that if the United States India trade negotiation is to come to the kind of desirable outcome, that there is going to have to be a resort to a more measured and logical process, other than you do this within 90 days, India, or else you're going to be really put out of the international trade arrangement with the United States altogether. So I think that is in process, but the latest developments indicate it's going to be a longer process than had been anticipated. Now, the bigger question, of course, is how you fit an international trade system into the Trump view of just it's transactional. What can you do for me today? You know, prior to Trump, we have had a World Trade Organization, and before that, a General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which provided for a multilateral consensus, most favored nation approach to trade. That's all out the window with President Trump, and it's sort of a my way or the highway approach, which might work for a real estate transaction in New York City, but ultimately does not work for the international trading system.
Let's just talk about India specifically. Given your experience with India trade relations, I'm curious to know about your thoughts on the Trump administration's claim that President Trump brokered a ceasefire between India and Pakistan by offering trade incentives. Ray, how do you react to that?
Well, I think, the Trump administration wants to take credit for anything that it considers to be favorable to them, to President Trump, and a win. So I have no doubt that the role of the United States in that ceasefire has been exaggerated. Indeed, the Indian government has indicated as much by not giving the kind of credit to President Trump and his administration that is being claimed. Now, there is no question in my mind that security and economic considerations are intimately connected. That doesn't mean you use, as President Trump has indicated, economic relations as a bullying tactic for a ceasefire between India and Pakistan, or for any other reason. But they are related in terms of how nations ultimately treat each other. Now, in the case of the ceasefire, I think India is quite right in keeping the emphasis on international terrorism. You know, in the past few years, we've kind of put aside the threat of international terrorism because it has been damped down. But the incident of Fulgham and the murder of 26 Indians and one Nepali citizen on really a religious basis shows that terrorism, unfortunately, is alive and well on the Indian subcontinent, and it takes a very coordinated and strong approach to be able to do that. Did the United States, and particularly Secretary Rubio, provide an off-ramp for Pakistan? Yes, I think that they did, but the Chinese have had an interest in this, that even though they were able to test their jet aircraft, the Chinese, it's not in their interest to have all-out war, much less nuclear war on the subcontinent on their doorstep. So the Chinese played a role. I wouldn't doubt that the Russians as well, having better relations with India than does the United States, also played a role. Ultimately, it seems to me that the initial approach of the Trump administration to the terrorism which took place, and that is, as you heard the president and Vice President J.D. Vance indicate, they started out saying, well, it's none of our business and we'll just let people do whatever. But when you're talking about generalized war, and particularly nuclear war, there is an interest across the board. What it takes is working with India on a sustained basis, not a hyphenated basis, not looking at Pakistan and India as some sort of equivalence in the equation, but working with India particularly to be able to damp down international terrorism. And that sometimes requires harsh measures, but it is not in the interest of India. I believe India can make its own decisions, of course, not in the interest of anybody to see generalized war. And indeed, the United States experience, particularly in Afghanistan, the Israeli experience in Gaza, shows that the generalized war approach to damping down or eliminating radical Islamic terrorism does not work. It didn't work in Afghanistan. We put in 20 years, $3 trillion, thousands of American lives for basically the kind of situation in many ways that we started with. And so India and the United States need to work on this. And it is not enough to say that it's just going to be an attack on camps if you do anything in India. It takes a broader intelligence sharing, a coordination and interoperability to be able to meet this continuing threat. And one hopes that saner heads, particularly within the State Department, Department of Defense, which Trump refers to as the deep state, if you will, all that means is civil servants who've been there and have some expertise, will be able to work with India to be able to meet this challenge, which is still there.
Right. Now, what could be the immediate economic consequences for, say, American businesses, American consumers, Indian businesses, when tariff policies are blocked mid-implementation, and especially when most things are being ironed out between the two countries at this point? You had Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal coming in recently. What is your take on that? Do you have anything from what's going on between the two countries at this point?
Well, Piyush Goyal, of course, Minister Goyal is a very competent negotiator. I've known him for a long time and have watched him work internationally, and he is about as good as you can have, it seems to me, in terms of the negotiation. Those negotiations started off very badly because it was simply a my way or the highway, April 2nd reciprocal Liberation Day for the United States approach. My information is that recently they've gone a lot better. And that's because saner heads, people who have more experience in international relations, have started to have a greater say from the U.S. side. I think that an agreement will be reached, but I do think that it's probably not going to be exactly within the 90 days that has been talked about by the Trump administration. And as I said earlier, I'm sure Minister Goyal and his team want to hear from the American negotiators now. Well, what is your negotiating authority, and shouldn't we get to all that? Shouldn't you, the United States, and you, the U.S. negotiators, get it worked out before we do anything in terms of announcement of a deal? I think India wants to make a deal. I think the United States wants to make a deal. There's no question that there is compatibility in terms of the trade relationship, and it's very important to India. But the chief detriment has been uncertainty. You cannot go forward not knowing from day to day what authority you're going to have, what tariff is going to stand, and which one is not. As I think Minister Goyal has said, there is no deal until there is a complete deal. And at this point, we still don't have it.
What is your advice to the current administration regarding their trade strategy moving forward, given this legal setback and these legal developments that we've seen? And what is your advice to India, who's watching all this unfold?
Well, my advice to the U.S. administration would be to step back and act within the law. And that means that you don't just say it's an emergency and I can do this by decree, but to go through the procedures which have been set up for international trade negotiation. We have an elaborate set of procedures that are supposed to apply in going forward to a free trade agreement, and those have not been done. And I think that you need to assure the markets in the United States that there is going to be this stability. Unfortunately, I don't think the administration is gonna follow that advice or take it, because that's not President Trump's way of doing it. He's a transactional guy, as I've said. He wants to handle everything not on a relationship basis, and that is how the parties get along for an extended period of time, but what's in it for me today and what can I claim? So I doubt that my kind of advice would be accepted. For the Indians, I think I would advise that it is correct to say, look, we can't reach an agreement until this is all worked out on the U.S. side. I would advise them, though, to look at particularly areas. Auto parts is one that I think of in regard to some of the textile kinds of areas, and look on a sector by sector. Even looking at the very difficult area of agricultural trade. And I would come up with what I viewed as in the Indian interest. Forget what's in the U.S. interest and what can be done to placate President Trump, but look at what is in the Indian interest. And I think you would find, even though there will be people, I think back to the 90s when I was in government, and there was a Bombay club, so-called, of people who were in economic power in Mumbai, who didn't want to see India integrated with the international economic system. But I think that those days are long past, and India needs to look at what its own interests are in lowering the tariff and non-tariff barriers in order to be able to reach agreements. I think that that there are areas. The UK agreement has shown that. The agreement before that with several European countries shows that there are areas that India, for its own reasons, can lower tariffs. And further, I would say to India, now is the time to step forward and provide leadership for the multilateral, consensus-based, most favored nation system, and not to succumb to this bilateral approach that President Trump has indicated. It may be that Taco for President Trump is right, that Trump always chickens out, but it's not the right way to go. And India, traditionally, it was an original signer of the GATT, the General Agreements on Tariffs and Trade, and was a charter member of the WTO. And I think that India, commensurate with its status as a great power, ought to provide leadership with the United States, is not now. And it should not be ceded to China to be the voice of reason. India has a democratic system and is in a position to provide leadership, which China and Russia never can in the world as a whole, because the principles upon which China and Russia operate are not those which are most compatible with the global South, with what happens between Europe and Asia, with what happens in terms of the Quad. And India has an opportunity now on the trade area, just as it did with the G20 last year under Prime Minister Modi, to provide a leadership which is broader than just what can you do for me today.
Right. Ray Vickery, thank you so much for taking up the time and talking to us. Really appreciate your assessment and your perspective on this issue.
It's always a pleasure, Rena. Thank you.